as we've kind of come into our own as the category leader, I think that's one of the advantages we have. We've gone through the growing pains. We know how to scale up and down, adjust to market trends, and optimize to support the agent.
Welcome to Powerhouse, where we interview the biggest names in housing and ask them about their strategy for growth. I'm Diego Sanchez, president of HousingWire, and my guest today is a special one. It's Leo Pareja, CEO of eXp Realty. Leo, it's so great to have you on the show.
Diego, thanks for having me.
So you took over as the CEO of eXp last year. How has that transition from Glenn to you gone?
Yeah, no. So it's for people watching this later on, it's almost 18 months after the announcement. And my transition was more of a moment in time, right? I became CEO during the NAR announcement. So the week we found out, so it all happened on a Friday. And by Monday, we'd spent the weekend deciding what we were going to do. And the decision was either be quiet, say no comment, or be loud. And I decided to be loud with Glenn's permission. And I kind of got very loud. And so probably within a week, Glenn sat me down and said, "You're the CEO of the company." And so it was more of a transition of what the market needed, what our agents wanted, and where we went.
Glenn set out a pretty amazing strategy of growth and technology when he founded the company and when he grew the company. Have you tweaked that strategy at all since you took over?
Yeah, no, Glenn is a visionary leader in this industry. And, I've said it in front of him, so this is not a secret. I didn't see it, right? I had heard about eXp probably a good 7-8 years before I joined the company. And I just quite didn't get it. And Glenn's been a visionary and probably one of the most disruptive visionaries in this industry. And so he was probably a decade ahead of the whole world. So when COVID came, it proved out his thesis better than anything. And actually, I recently heard him on a podcast say, because people assumed he liked COVID, and he actually said he didn't, because then everybody else realized they could do it too. And so he said we probably had a couple more years of going against the grain if COVID hadn't accelerated the ability to work remotely and virtually for the whole planet. But like all companies, we go through phases. I think phase one of eXp was highly entrepreneurial and bootstrapped and kind of, solve the problem in front of you. And since I've joined as a scaled enterprise. So we're no longer the kind of disruptor, small person fighting in, the good fight. We're now considered one of the larger incumbents that people like to compete with. And so I think, whether it's a season, a phase, I think, all companies and individuals go through these periods where you learn and you mature and you now optimize for the current season that you're in. And now we've gone through a lot of the learning mistakes. We've learned how to be a leader in the space. I think we've learned how to optimize our business. We've corrected along the way in parts of the model that may have not worked early on, and really found our voice. Right. The one thing I'm super clear about as CEO is that we can't be all things to all people. And I think I see that be a misconception in business in general, and not only in our space. And you have to decide who your ideal customer is. And, we're in the agent business. And I always say eXp is a platform to allow entrepreneurs to build whatever size dream they want. So very intentionally, I focus on entrepreneurial agents, the ones who are looking more for a platform than a company per se. I think a lot of our legacy competitors are offering what I describe as an app versus we're the iOS. So I see ourselves as an operating system for entrepreneurs.
It's so interesting. And to your point, you were growing before COVID hit. And I think COVID accelerated some things. But what do you think was so attractive? And you say you're not everything to everybody, but you're a lot of things to a lot of agents over the past several years. What do you think is attracting people to that platform that you've built?
Yeah, so many reasons, right? But one is I think we create a tribe of like-minded individuals. I've always said people join people. And I think the most attractive thing about our network are who participates in it. We have some of the most productive teams. We have some of those productive solo agents who are highly entrepreneurial, who are really looking to build and define their own brand in the marketplace. I many times say that we are secondary to the agent, right? We're not a consumer facing or focused brand per se. We're more interested in partnering with the most iconic folks in the market and then giving them the tools to go faster, stronger, better. So one of the things that I have focused on quite a bit since joining the company is on operational excellence. I want to be the best brokerage on the planet because unlike some of my other scaled perceived competitors, and I use perceived very specifically because I don't think I compete with franchisors, right? When I say I'm the biggest brokerage in the world, people say, well, Keller Williams, Remax, these brands are bigger than you. And I say, well, those are brands. We're the actual brokerage. So we actually fulfill and close and support transactions, meaning I'm the broker of record. We have folks that close out transactions and disperse commissions. And no one's ever done it like we have at the scale we have. And so it's a new concept. We created a category of cloud-based national brokerages. And now I believe every new company as it invented will look more like us and the legacy participants. And so I think we focus on completely different things, right? I've been quoted saying to many folks when they mention a legacy company, I say those companies are more in common with Yum Brands than with me, right? The company that sells Tim Hortons and Burger Kings, because they're selling a geographic boundary and then sell those folks cups, lids, and straws and burger patties, versus they're not in the transaction like I am. So in that analogy, we own stores with them, and we partner with them in the local market and support them in a completely different way.
How have you kept up with the infrastructure that's needed for this massive growth in agent count that you've had over the past 5 years?
Yeah, and there's only one way to do it, which is adjusting in flight. We've had to scale up, scale down, modify, optimize, kind of dial it in. And a lot of times when an agent is considering us versus a copycat, to say it nicely, who's hoping to replicate what we've done, one of the drawbacks is I say, well, they don't know what they don't know. They haven't gone through the scaling lessons. And so as we've kind of come into our own as the category leader, I think that's one of the advantages we have. We've gone through the growing pains. We know how to scale up and down, adjust to market trends, and optimize to support the agent.
And are you building corporate infrastructure, ops teams, ops leaders, and in a cloud-based company, where do those people sit? Are they distributed across the US and across the world? How do you structure that operational team?
I think that's the part that most people just don't comprehend our scale, right? We have over 2,300 full-time employees and or contractors to support 83,000 agents in 27 countries. And, the sun does not set on eXp transactions, which is a wild thought to have. And so we've really, I think, mastered distributed workforce. And so all teams work from home. We don't have one single physical office. There is no HQ, which is now that I live it every day, I can't actually imagine going back to one.
Yeah, it's and it takes a real skill set, and you have to develop your expertise in being able to work in a distributed environment. So you build a little bit of a moat as you get better and better at it.
Well, one of the things, so my previous company that I was running, that I founded during COVID, we sent everybody home because we didn't have a choice. And I can tell you that there's a distinction between it being in the DNA and the fiber of the company versus it was like a reaction to this uncontrollable thing that happened to the world, right? Like it is in our DNA. I think we all appreciate the privilege that it is to work from home. And so, a lot of the things that I hear other companies complain about aren't really issues for us, right? During working hours, the expectation is you are available. You're not going to call me back for 2 days. And so, especially in this moment in time in the latter part of 2025, and we've seen this huge push for return to work. I think it's even made our positions more coveted.
Yeah, that really makes sense. All right, so let's talk about the housing market, which has been difficult for a couple of years, but Mortgage rates, inventory, and pricing data have all gotten more favorable, especially over the summer. Are eXp real estate agents seeing any benefit from this turn in the data?
Yeah, that's a great question, Diego. And I think in 2025, we're in a hyper-localized market, right? I think in 2020, 2021, 2022, we kind of had kind of directionally accurate macro statements for the whole country versus 2025. In my prediction for 2026, it's going to be a hyper-localized business, right? The Southwest of Florida is performing very differently than the Northeast of the United States. And so what I preach to my agents all the time is to be hyper aware of your local market. Do you understand the days on market, the absorption ratios, the months of inventory, right? Do you know how to calculate the difference between a seller's market, a balanced market, and a buyer's market, mathematically speaking, so you can explain a seller and or buyer, right? One sentence that's kind of been my catchphrase for 2025, especially once we hit the middle of the year, which is sellers believe it's 2021, buyers believe it's 2008 because of the media. And the answer is it's neither, right? And you as the expert advisor on either side of the transactions, I think it's very important that you educate and explain the nuances of what's going on in your local market.
But how do you empower them to do that? It's not easy to become your local housing market data expert.
Yeah. And again, in our virtual platform, we have tons of educational opportunities on a daily basis, both by corporate and by the agents. And so I think education is key, right? One of the most important initiatives I've had is eXp University, whether it's 6-week high accountability programs or specialized modules around social media or open houses, and just being super aware. And I sold for 16 years, and I always said my superpower was being able to look at the data. I think in a world where we have so much information, and large language models are not making the problem easier. They're probably adding to it because we have so much information at our fingertips. I think the expert advisor in any category, real estate, lending, insurance, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this statistic, Diego, but travel agents are making a resurgence, right? An industry that was once almost rendered obsolete is coming back because we need guides and experts that can sift through the data and give actionable suggestions that are fiduciary.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I'm just thinking about it personally. We're planning a family trip to Costa Rica for the winter break. And we absolutely have taken advantage of experts that are out there because it's just going to make it a better trip, right? And I imagine the same goes for buying and selling a house. Like, it's just going to make it a better experience if we're working with a great advisor.
Absolutely.
So, big headline right now is there's a government shutdown, and who knows when it's going to end. Is that impacting your business for the positive or the negative?
Yeah. So I grew up in the DC area, so I'm more familiar with government politics than most agents. And again, in some parts of the country, like DC, that has a bigger effect than others. And then macro, as the United States, it awfully affects FHA and VA and any loan that's insured or sold by the government. One of the things that I go back to, and this is after being 23 years in the industry, is that the human condition is what drives all real estate decisions, right? So at the end of the day, the biggest drivers of the market are, do we have to move? If so, do we buy or rent? And what inventory is available? So the affordability constraints, the abilities to get a mortgage, and the amount of houses kind of dictate all that. But I think of the real estate industry almost like it's a three-legged stool, right? Between inventory, cost, and affordability. And that really has more constraints on anything else, right? If there was a lot more inventory and rates were lower, we'd have more transactions. And so anything that affects that trifecta affects the market. I don't have specific information to give you as to like the nominal effect on the portfolio of transactions. But I'm for less friction. So it's not additive.
Right. The less volatility, the better in a lot of ways.
Correct.
All right. Another big headline, particularly in real estate, is this battle between Zillow and Compass as sort of the primary combatants around Compass's private listing strategy. Where do you and eXp stand on that private listing strategy?
Yeah, I think my position is very well documented. I've probably been one of the louder advocates of transparency. So I believe that the North American way of doing real estate, where we cooperate and share data. So meaning I enter a listing into the MLS, you enter a listing to the MLS, and we agree to share that data across all platforms, is in the best interest of the US consumer, which, by the way, comma, turns into the best interest of my company, right? So I believe less friction for the consumer, a complete data set, more transparency, creates a higher net execution for sellers, creates a open and available, access for buyers, so we don't tread into fair housing issues. And so I don't know of any example in commerce where restricting access is a better experience for a consumer. And in turn, not purely selflessness, the better the experience, the better the market, the more liquid, the more available, the easier it is to transact and create opportunities as a commercial enterprise.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because eXp could form a really big private listings network, but you're choosing transparency because you think it's better for the consumer and it's better for your business.
Correct. And I have a unique vantage point because I operate in 27 countries, and I can tell you it's extremely painful in Europe and in Asia and in Latin America, where we don't have that, and takes longer to sell. It's harder to finance, less transactions. Like the North American market creates transparent data sets that gives us comparables and the ability to price properties and the ability to get AVMs and HELOCs that exist in a very short period of time. There are markets in the world that are just as sophisticated from a pricing standpoint, from a economic standpoint, that don't enjoy some of these benefits. And I believe it comes from this complete data set that we enjoy in this country.
So sticking with Compass for a moment, they just acquired Anywhere, which, if that transaction closes, may allow them to expand their private listing strategy. And they've had a very different growth path than eXp. They've been very focused on growing through acquisition. How does eXp continue to grow market share at the pace that you've been growing it, no matter what happens with Compass, Anywhere, private listings, and in the rest of the industry? How do you focus on you and your growth?
Yeah, and that's what I always do. We focus on our flywheel. First of all, it's understanding that we're not all things to all people. There are multiple models that work. And my best example of that is not a single company is 100% market share. No one kind of has a silver bullet or figured it out. I think people choose different models that appeal to them for a bunch of reasons. And so, I think people don't understand the scale of our business. So 83,000 agents in 27 countries, over 60 some thousand in the US alone. So if you were to combine the Anywhere company-owned stores with Compass, I'm a close second, not a distant second. And I believe that over time, we will get a proportion of the like-minded individuals like we have. And so we're focused on our strategy and what works for our agents while keeping the consumer in mind.
Leo, you mentioned it before. You have had some copycats over the past couple of years, some of which seem to be pretty well-run businesses. Can you take a page out of the Compass playbook and maybe acquire some of those copycats over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company that is non-public, forward-facing information, and I can't comment as to strategically what we will and will not do. But what I can say and what we will continue to do is we focus on attracting our tribe and the folks that align with our model. And I do think there's quite a bit of folks who are attracted to our stance and view of transparency.
So when I think of brokerages that are progressive with technology, you mentioned distributed being in your DNA. I think technology is also in the DNA at eXp. What innovations are coming in 2026 for your agents and their customers?
Yeah, so yes, I completely agree. I think technology is a core foundational part of the way we view the world. And it's so foundational that sometimes I forget about it, right? So we tend to attract an agent who does like technology, or they probably wouldn't be able to thrive on our platform since we're fully distributed and completely virtual. But I think, every company in the world will be continuing to innovate and focus on the advantages and new opportunities that AI is creating, right? as someone who built a tech company, I'm floored by the ability to vibe code now. So just about any person in the company, at a minimum can create a wireframe of a concept. And, even if that first step just gets it over to the engineers who can build it out completely, there are parts of the business process that are now available to every member of the company that just didn't exist before from a technical standpoint. So I think there is an in-between time between now and whatever the world looks like. And if we were to look akin to what happened in the early 2000s with the advent of the dot-com bubble that gave way to high-speed internet through, the collapsing cost of cable. And that really is what gave birth to high-speed internet like 4 years later, right? And so I tell people all the time, I think with AI, we're probably in our MySpace era, meaning that the incumbents of the future may or may not already exist, right? And so there's probably going to be a lot of rapid change. I think my agents and other agents should expect companies to be in a very high experiment mode, right? More than previous. And I've actually told my team internally and agents, like, be prepared that some of the stuff we build and give you is going to be thrown out in 18 months. Because at the speed at which stuff is changing. And I think the suggestion I have to any human being on the planet right now is to stay in curiosity and to test and play and not marry the outcome, right? Because I don't know if any of the technology will stick around or someone launches something substantially better or cheaper or faster or stronger 6, 12, 18 months later. But I think it's a really exciting time to be in business.
Super exciting. And, we're only 65 people at HousingWire. But the vibe coding is really interesting, and folks are coming up with concepts that we can turn into products extremely quickly. But how do you systematize that so that you go from the 65 people at HousingWire to the 80,000 people who could potentially be vibe coding at eXp? And how do you take in all those suggestions and productize them?
Yeah. So first of all, like the staff is 2,300, so it's a much smaller population of who's part of the corporate team. But I think, again, our DNA is very flat, meaning that Glenn and I have always been accessible to lots of folks, and we're open to suggestions, and constantly people are wanting to show us stuff. And so I think part of the strategy is to stay in curiosity at all times, right? And by the way, I mean that not only in technology, but in what competitors are up to. I think there has to be a high level of humility and curiosity of what other folks are doing. And you can say, hey, I disagree for X, Y, and Z reasons, or that's pretty innovative, and maybe we should consider adding that to our value stack. And not too many ideas are unique in business, right? And I say often a quote that say marketers ruin everything, right? So if somebody comes up with something good, there's probably some arbitrage in the first to market advantage, and then everybody adds it to their playbook, and then it becomes a table stake, and then we got to find the next interesting way to innovate.
Well, let's wrap with this question. You're one of a few, probably a handful of Latino CEOs of a public company. Do you have any advice for other Latinos and Latinas that aspire to become a CEO someday?
Yeah, so I think I'm the only one of the housing category, and overall in the S&P, I think I'm a part of a very small club, if you will. But it's been my approach, and advocacy has been a big part of my life, professionally speaking. I founded NARP's DC chapter, and then went on to sit on their national board, and I've been a loud advocate. But I think where I've seen a lot of folks miss the mark in advocacy is they don't talk about the economic impact. Right? So a couple of things are true for me. I always wanted to be the number one fill in the blank, comma, that happened to be Latino. Right? I wanted to be the number one agent in Keller Williams, Wall Street Journal. I wanted to be in all the places because of my execution, my merit, my business ability, comma, that happened to be Latino, not the other way around. And I always approached advocacy around the issues that are important to me as a Latino as the economic opportunity, right? The economic impact that the community I care about impacts the country. And so one is believe there are no limitations, because I truly don't. And one of the really cool experiences of my life in my last company was raising a lot of venture capital and growth capital, and that was probably the least amount of discrimination I ever experienced. I truly felt that at the highest levels of participant capitalism, the best idea wins. And sometimes what I think I want anyone to hear who is part of a group that is not the majority is to not let it slow you down or be in your head. And if you are a participant at the highest levels and you execute, you'll have a fair share at the opportunity.
Yeah, and if you look at the opportunity for Hispanic homeownership in the U.S., wow, that's a booming business.
Absolutely.
A lot of opportunity.
Absolutely.
Well, Leo, it's been so great to catch up with you this morning. Really appreciate you joining me today on Powerhouse.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me, Diego.